On today's Endtime Show, we're going to break down how Venezuela turned into a narco-terror state, a central hub for drug money, terror networks, and hostile foreign powers. Iran, Russia, and China, they're not drifting into the Western Hemisphere by accident, and this is strategic and intentional. And it raises a sobering question. Could this be one of the sparks that ignites the prophesied Third World War? A conflict the Bible warns could come suddenly. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Robbbins with Endtime Ministries. I do thank you for joining me on this edition of the Endtime Show. And wow, what a weekend, right? I mean, you guys watched the news in the early hours. Saturday morning. The United States went straight into Caracas, took Nicolas Maduro into custody. And this wasn't some random move. It was a deliberate strike that cut off a major connection in the growing anti-American axis of evil. Maduro, of course, had been lining up with Russia, China, Iran, cutting deals and giving our enemies a foothold right here in our hemisphere. And now, of course, he's not running a narco-state anymore. He's on U.S. soil facing justice. Him and his wife just pleaded not guilty, of course. They just pleaded not guilty up there in a New York court. So the United Nations and the usual global voices they're complaining, they're howling at the moon, but they can complain all they want. But America just sent a clear message. We are willing to act, and we're willing to defend our country, and we're willing to break dangerous alliances before they break us. But I look at everything through a prophetic perspective. Now, I don't see every news story as a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Many of the major news stories, though, they are in one way or another tied into all of this when you look at it on a global scale. Of course, Revelation chapter 9, verse 13 through 21, that describes a future global war rising out of the Euphrates River region, a conflict so devastating that it's going to kill 1/3 of all of humanity. And with the so-called axis of evil, China, Russia, Iran, all working in coordination and now deeply connected to regimes like Venezuela, it's from a prophetic perspective, it certainly raises a serious question. Could moves like this be part of the spark that eventually ignites that prophetic event? How's all this tied in together? Well, that's what I want to do on the program today, is to kind of tie everything together for you, help it all make sense, what's really going on, and how it affects everything from a biblical prophetic perspective. Before we go there and do this deep dive, I want to announce this weekend I'll be doing a prophecy conference. It's my first prophecy conference of the year. We always do it at my home church, North Cities UPC, right here in Garland, Texas, 502 Beltline Road, right there in Garland. Of course, our pastor, D.G. Hargrove, Pastor Johnny Hargrove, Pastor Steve Schobert. And this is going to be next weekend, Saturday, January 10th at 6 p.m. and Sunday, January 11th at 6 p.m. And I'll be spending Saturday evening on Israel, things you need to know, what's going on, updates, how to, I'll be walking you through a giant timeline. I don't think I've ever done that at a conference before, so it's going to be really cool Saturday evening. Sunday evening, we'll be doing a kind of like a breaking news update, and then we will have a time of question and answer at the end there, where you will banter back and forth, me up in the platform, you guys in the audience. Is going to be awesome. So looking forward to the conference this weekend. Also, many of you know that Doug Norvell is starting his own church out in Kilgore, Texas. And he felt God would have him to do that. Is he leaving Endtime Ministries? No. Is he still going to be on the radio? Yes. But he is starting a church out in the town where he lives, Kilgore. and he's going to be doing an end-time Bible study out there. Any of you guys in Longview, Gladewater, Kilgore, anywhere in, Western Louisiana, East Texas, anywhere out there, if you guys want a good end-time Bible study, of course, Doug is a wonderful teacher, and so he's going to be having a Bible study, and his church is called the Church on the Hilltop, and that's going to start January 12th at 6:30 p.m., It's going to be at 3286. That's 3286 FM 1252 in West Kilgore, Texas. And so if you'd like to attend that Bible study, it'd be a great Bible study. You guys can join Doug for that, and it would be an awesome time. Now, also, we've already signed up a ton of people to go with us on our Israel tour. We're going to be going to Israel this coming May 6th through the 17th. We're going back so many things. I tried to put together a lesson next year on my conferences for the Mark of the Beast. It's like God said, no, Dave, I don't want you to do that. I mean, I was like hitting a writer's block. But he really talked to me about focusing on Israel this year. And so that's why, man, when I started putting the PowerPoints and everything together for Israel, it just flowed. And so I really believe we're in the will of God. And certainly looking forward to our next trip to Israel. The one we just went on was fabulous. And looking forward to the one coming up. Our trip is like no other. We do a lot of things that a lot of people don't do. You get a very well-rounded the scope of Israel. It's a wonderful trip. And so we're going to be going May 6th to May 17th, but you need to go ahead and sign up because there's going to be a cutoff time when we got to get flights and all that stuff. We've already got a lot of people signed up, but she does have some spots left. So if you'd like to go with us, contact my wife, Jana, here at Endtime, 1-800-363-8463, or Robbbins at endtime.com. And that's May 6th through May 17th. Sign up now because it's going to go really quick. And so looking forward to that next trip to Israel. Okay. Let's get off into Venezuela here. Man, I really wanted to do this and to kind of help it all make sense. And I learned a lot as I went through here and was studying for this. So I think to start out here, let me explain why the international community keeps attacking President Trump over Venezuela. From their perspective, it's because President Trump is willing to ignore the global norms when they protect dictators and failed systems. President Trump used heavy sanctions. He openly challenged Maduro's legitimacy. He recognized opposition leadership. And he made it clear that the U.S. was willing to apply real pressure instead of endless diplomacy before he ever went and got Maduro. Well, to international institutions and many foreign governments, that crossed a line because it bypassed the United Nations. And this is one of the big things I want everybody to get today. And because they're trying to create a world governing body, and the United Nations doesn't like anyone trying to go against them and what they're trying to do in the world. And so they see President Trump as what he did this weekend as part of that. And President Trump, they see him as disregarding strict ideas of sovereignty and threatening their rules-based system, which is designed to limit unilateral action by powerful nations. But this is the truth, everybody. What they really want, what they're really afraid of, isn't Venezuela. It's the precedent that's being set by President Trump. President Trump showed that the United States doesn't need permission from global bureaucracies to confront tyranny in our hemisphere. And that challenges a world order built on processes and consensus and delay rather than results. And the liberal international order is, in many ways, is fracturing. It's a paper tiger. And it's galling them. And this is one of the main points I want to bring out today because I think at some point in the near future, they're going to pull out all the stops to try to stop President Trump. Now, let me speak to that. What has the national or international establishment already done to try to stop President Trump from coming against the New World, or I should say the establishment, the global establishment, this world order. What have they done to try to stop him? Think about this. Nationally and internationally, they've tried the Russia collusion investigation. They've tried intelligence and law enforcement leaks. They have tried bureaucratic resistance. Of course, the deep state. On so many fronts, hostile and coordinated media coverage, just hammering Trump and his administration. They treated Sarah Huckabee like she was the media treated her horrible. Hostile and coordinated media coverage, weaponized impeachment twice, lawfare, and all of this litigation. Even after he left office, big tech censorship and bans, corporate and financial deplatforming, debanking. I mean, just one thing right after another. But they haven't been able to stop him, right? So think of it like this. President Trump wants to be known as the peace president, right? You've heard him say that. Well, they've tried all this other stuff and haven't been able to stop President Trump. What is the one thing that they haven't tried yet? I mean, so think about this. Let me give you some more things they've tried, because I don't want to forget something here. Election rule changes and legitimacy challenges, things to stop Trump, the establishment, national and international, congressional obstruction and investigations, diplomatic resistance from allies, opposition from international institutions, sanctions, trade retaliation and global pressure, assassination threats and attempts. All of this, they've come against President Trump. And none of this has succeeded. And there's so much more. But none of this has succeeded. So what's left? This international cabal, national and international. They tried to take Trump down, haven't been able to do it. But he wants to be known as the peace president. What's the one thing they've got left in their bag of tricks? And this sounds horrible. World War. Imagine if they could lay World War III at President Trump's feet. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm speculating. But think they've tried just about everything else. They've tried to assassinate him. They've tried one thing after another. It hasn't worked. And he wants to be known, he wants his legacy as a president to be known as the peace president. Nobody could get peace done. He wanted to be the one that would walk in and get the peace situation settled. So what do you think that one thing, in my mind, I'm speculating here again, but what do you think the one thing that they would love to lay at President Trump's feet that would overshadow everything else he's done in their eyes? World War. And so with that perspective in mind, I know World War III is one of the next thing on God Prophetic Timeline. And I want to show you how this Venezuela thing kind of ties into that. Now, will it lead to World War III 100%? I don't know the answer to that. I know World War III is coming scripturally. But I wanted everybody to understand really what's going on. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, when people imagine World War III, how it might begin, they imagine missiles, mushroom clouds, armies clashing across borders, right? Well, that's really the result of that. But history tells us something very different. The onset of World War III, it might look very different from the beginnings of other global wars. World War I didn't begin with an assassination, but by the time those shots were fired in Sarajevo, Europe was already trapped in rigid alliances, arms races, broken diplomacy. And the war is the culmination of things that have been happening for a very long time. One spark ignited a system that could no longer absorb pressure. World War II didn't begin with the invasion of Poland. It began years earlier when treaties failed, aggression went unpunished, and lawlessness was normalized. President Trump knows this stuff. He's got advisors. They're telling him all this stuff. And by the time tanks rolled in World War II, the war was already decided. It was already running and people were happening. it was ongoing, and then tanks started to roll, okay? And that, it looks like, is how the next world war will begin. Not with just a declaration of world war, but with systems breaking down, with criminality replacing governance, with sanctions ignored, rules unenforced, and hostile powers quietly aligning with the public while the public is distracted. And by the time the first explosion makes headlines, the alliances will already be locked in. The escalation paths are already built, and the conflict is unavoidable at that point. And look at what's going on in the world right now. One of the clearest cases, let's say the clearest case study of this process unfolding in real time is Venezuela. So I want to start with what is no longer disputed. For more than a decade, U.S. and international authorities have identified Venezuela as a primary cocaine transit corridor, not a producer, but a kind of a gateway. There was some produced there, but mainly for all these other nations, this big gateway. Drugs move from Colombia through Venezuelan territory, their ports, their airspaces, onward to Central America, the Caribbean, West Africa, ultimately Europe, the United States. But what makes Venezuela unique is not geography, it's state involvement. Now, again, Maduro and his wife, they declared themselves innocent today in a New York court system. And I knew that's how it would be. And I just read where the judge that is over the case is very, I read where he has a track record of constraining Republican administrations, especially the Trump era actions involving immigration, national security, executive authority, and conservatives are seeing this as ideological hostility and not neutrality in this Maduro case. The judge that's over this, okay? So how in the world he got taken before that judge, I don't know. But we'll see how everything plays out. But multiple U.S. administrations, Republican and Democrat, have alleged that elements of the Venezuelan military and political leadership, they protected, the leadership protected, taxed, and coordinated these trafficking routes. And the so-called, it's Cartel de los Soles. It's Spanish for the Cartel of the Suns. That's not some kind of a street gang, everybody. It's alleged to be a state-enabled network leveraging uniforms, radar control, airports, shipping registries, and diplomatic cover for everything. And that matters because when a government becomes dependent on criminal revenue, that, of course, that crosses a line. And it can no longer reform without collapsing. It can't go to a modern governmental system the way they're supposed to be ran because it's dependent upon the cartels and different things as funding. It must defend the system that is feeding it and supporting it. And so that moment came into full view back in, what was it, March 2020, when the U.S. Department of Justice indicted Nicolas Maduro and senior regime officials on charges including narco-terrorism, alleging that the cocaine trafficking was not just corruption, but a strategic weapon used to harm the United States. Now, I want to pause right here to make sure you guys understand something. Indicting a sitting head of state for narco-terrorism is extraordinary. And it places that regime in the same conceptual category as terror sponsors and rogue states. And once that line is crossed, the regime has only two choices: submit to international pressure and collapse, or seek protection from rival powers. Well, here's what happened. Venezuela, they chose the second. They sought protection from rival powers. And that is where Iran enters the picture. Remember, I talked to you about the axis of evil. Beginning in 2020, while Venezuela's refining infrastructure was that their oil production was effectively non-functional, Iranian fuel tankers crossed the Atlantic under escort, delivering gasoline in open defiance of U.S. sanctions. And with all of these supplements, there are a million strings attached to all of this. You understand? These are criminal networks here. And they're not isolated shipments. They were coordinated state operations, fuel for gold, fuel for access, and fuel for influence. There's a million strings attached to all of this. But fuel shipments were only the visible layer. You've seen how the United States went down there and captured many of the oil ships coming in. Trump said, we're going to keep the ship, we're going to sell the oil. Okay, this is in the news, at the top of every news source right now. Well, behind these things were financial workarounds. We had sanctioned them. They were sanctioned. There were financial workarounds, barter systems, logistics channels operating entirely outside Western banking oversight. Again, Iran is a master of sanctions evasion. Venezuela became another node in that global Iranian playbook. And then came the air bridge. What was that? Well, the cargo flights with these opaque manifests, aircraft with prior ties to Iranian-sanctioned airlines, irregular routes, long ground stops, diplomatic confusion. One such aircraft was eventually seized in Argentina, igniting, quite alarm throughout intelligence crisis. Well, why is such the concern? Because Iran's overseas operations are not commercial in nature. They are strategic. And Iran's closest proxy, which is Hezbollah, has spent decades building drug money laundering networks in Latin America, from the tri-border area to Central America and the Caribbean. And now that's not conjecture. U.S. law enforcement cases have repeatedly documented Hezbollah-linked financiers using cocaine proceeds to fund operations in the Middle East. So understand the architecture forming here. Venezuelan territory provides permissive transit. Drug revenue generates untraceable cash. Iranian networks specialize in moving value covertly, and terror proxies convert money into capability. It's funding what's going on. Maybe Hezbollah in Israel and all this. Not what Hezbollah is doing to Israel, I should say. There have been people that have come out and said all of this is Israel's behind the whole thing. You got to be kidding me. They don't understand what's really going on here. Drugs, really in this situation, the drugs become a strategic currency. Now, let's layer Russia onto this system, because I'm talking about the axis of evil here, Venezuela, and what's going on. Russia's role is not the narcotics. It is regime preservation and military geometry. What does that mean? Well, when U.S. sanctions tightened on Venezuela, Russian oil firms facilitated Venezuelan crude exports through these shadow fleets and intermediary companies. When diplomatic pressure increased, Russia provided kind of like a political shielding. And when military pressure rose, Russia advisors arrived. Now, this is why this is why what happened on Saturday morning with them going down there and capturing Maduro, this was huge. Maduro was on his home was on a military base. We went in on that military base, got Maduro and his wife, and got out. We had some military guys injured, but nobody was killed, and we didn't lose one piece of equipment on a Venezuelan military base. And Russia provided some of the deterrent systems on that military base, and we still were able to get them out. Now, if you read these stories, all these stories are out there. The Russian bombers, they landing in Venezuela, They were not some kind of symbolic stunts. You've read about this in the news over the last few years. These Russian bombers landing there, they were signals, messages that this regime was now under the informal protection of a nuclear power. I'm talking about right here, down here on the below the United States and Cuba down here. You understand? Now, this mirrors Cold War doctrine precisely. Place strategic assets close to your adversaries, not to fight immediately, but to complicate response calculus, right? So Russia is lashing out, of course, after President Trump took decisive action against Venezuela's corrupt socialist regime, confirming the removal of Nicolas Maduro to face serious criminal charges tied to narco-terrorism. Of course, he says, well, we're innocent. The United States, that move signals a firm stand against a hostile dictatorship that has destabilized the entire region, fueled drug trafficking, and oppressed its own people. And so Moscow's response, vowing to defend Venezuela, and Vladimir Putin is threatening to defend them as we speak, that reveals Russia's true agenda, propping up a failed authoritarian regime to undermine American influence and project power into the Western Hemisphere. And by backing Maduro and his allies, Russia is once again siding with criminals and strongmen rather than democracy and the rule of law. And so while some critics are warning, hey, this could lead to World War III, the real danger comes from allowing adversaries like Russia to intimidate the United States into inaction. Well, we jumped through that hoop on Saturday morning, didn't we? Trump's approach, it demonstrates strength and clarity, showing that America will not tolerate narco-states or foreign powers challenging U.S. leadership close to home. And, of course, the situation underscores a familiar choice, right? America's resolve versus Russian aggression. Really, peace is best preserved not through appeasement, but through strength and deterrence and willingness to defend U.S. interest and regional stability. And then that brings up China. So we've got Iran involved here. We've got Russia involved. Now China comes into play. Well, you say, well, what in the world's China? Well, China is that's kind of like the quiet enabler here. And so I'm going to dive off into China and Venezuela when we get back, but you can see how the axis of evil, what President Trump did Saturday morning was a lot more than just go down there and capture the head of state, who really even wasn't the president, and captured him on some narco-terrorist charge. There was a whole lot more than that, and I'll continue on when we get back from the break here. One of the most frequently asked questions we receive at Endtime Ministries is, why do you guys teach the rapture happens after the Great Tribulation? Should we be passively waiting to be taken at any moment or actively preparing for the greatest revival in history? Paul states plainly it will not occur until after the man of sin, the Antichrist, is revealed, and that will not happen until God declares it is time. I will walk you through a timeline of the final 7 years. The rapture, the marriage supper of the Lamb, and the second coming of Jesus Christ is one continuous event. It's not an event separated by 7 years.
Now streaming on OnlySource and available to order at endtime.com. Go to endtime.com/next or call 1-800-ENDTIME.
What if you could understand Bible prophecy? Dave Robbbins, the host of the Endtime Show's TV and radio programs, is holding a free prophecy conference near you. Gain peace and understanding about what the Bible says concerning end-time prophecy. Call 1-800-ENDTIME or go to endtime.com/events to see when Dave will be in a location near you.
You know, when we talk about this axis of evil, China, Russia, Iran, what in the world are they doing down here in Venezuela? Come on. Everybody thinks they're just down there having a vacation. No. So much more than that. China, again, the quiet enabler. So China doesn't really need Venezuela to be strong. China just needs Venezuela to be dependent upon them. Now, through oil for debt agreements, infrastructure projects, and continued crude purchases, even under sanctions, China has ensured the regime could survive financially. Venezuelan oil was rerouted, rebranded, blended, and sold, and the cash flow continued. That's why Maduro has been able to do what he's doing. China's interest is not ideology. It is systemic erosion of the U.S. dominance. Every sanctioned state kept alive outside U.S. financial systems weakens the post-World War II order that the United States has been the principal driver of since 1945. And so China is really, again, kind of like a quiet enabler. They just need Venezuela to be dependent upon them for influence. So let's step back a little bit. What do we have? We got a criminalized state in the Western Hemisphere. That's why we went down there and got Maduro, right, and his wife. Sustained by drug money, protected by Russia, logistically linked to Iran, financed by China. And this is not a conspiracy theory, everyone. It is a multipolar stress fracture in the global order. And now I think, in my opinion, there are many people that are in cahoots with a lot of this stuff. Drug money is big money. And it is a way to have cash flow that's not trackable. Ooh, did I say that? And there's a lot of people involved in this stuff. And I just found out where I probably won't mention their name, but I just found out where a huge drug cartel was funding a presidential run just over the last, let's say, 20 years, maybe 25 years. Gave to one of our presidential candidates a large drug cartel. Why do you think they're doing that? Maybe for a border to be left open? Did I say that? Okay, moving on. So here's where this becomes a World War III scenario for me. And again, I'm speculating. Will this lead to World War? They're all tied together in one way or another. World wars begin because systems collide. Law enforcement collides with national sovereignty. Sanctions collide with survival. Border crises collide with domestic stability. Proxy conflicts collide with alliance obligations. Eventually, a threshold is crossed. And consider the escalation paths. If drug terror finance expands, the U.S. increases interdiction. If interdiction increases, Venezuela frames it as aggression. If Venezuela is pressured, Russia and Iran increase support. If support increases, miscalculation becomes inevitable. And at the same time, mass migration from collapsed states strains borders. Energy warfare strains allies. Multiple proxy wars dilute deterrence. And history tells us that when deterrence weakens, challengers advance. World War I didn't start because one man was assassinated. Political assassinations happened before without global war. On January 18th, it was back in 1914. There was I think his name was Ferdinand, and his wife Sophie, Duchess of Homburg. They were shot and killed in Sarajevo by a guy named Gavrilo Princip, I think his name was. He was a Serbian nationalist. Well, what made 1914 different was that alliances were already locked in place. Australia moved against Serbia. Russia rushed to defend Serbia. Germany backed Australia. France backed Russia. Britain was pulled in through treaty obligations, and within weeks, a regional crisis became a world war. Many things were already in play. Hence, the reason I'm talking about Venezuela today. Russia, China, Iran, all involved in all of this. President Trump goes in and just takes over. Okay? These alliances were all formed for years now. And again, I'm speculating. I want everybody to know. I know prophetically World War we're right on the precipice of that. But when you go to World War I, the assassination was only the trigger. The alliances made it unstoppable. Okay, you understand what I'm saying here with Venezuela? I'm talking about World War I, but I'm likening that to what's going on right now. And that's the danger of these rigid alliances. Once they're all based on like this criminal, the people supporting Maduro, they knew he was a criminal. He's trafficking drugs like just hundreds of millions of dollars. And they're propping him up and supporting him. Now you have a President Donald Trump of the United States of America that goes down there and says, not anymore. And we go down there on a Saturday morning and capture him. And so, once these rigid alliances activate, no one controls the outcome. World War II began with incremental aggression, but only because lawlessness had been tolerated for too long. World War III, think of it. One scenario would say it's not going to begin with one nation attacking another. It looks like, I'm watching this from every angle, that it could begin when criminalized states, shielded by great powers, i.e. Iran and Russia and China, when these criminalized states, shielded by great powers, force confrontation by accumulation. Think about that. Venezuela would not be the cause. Venezuela would be the symptom of all these alliances, a symptom of a world shifting from rules to force, from transparency to these shadow systems, from peace to managed conflict. And history offers one final warning. When hostile powers entrench themselves near great nations, when crime becomes a strategy, when deterrence erodes quietly, war does not announce itself. It simply arrives already underway. And then you have somebody over the United States of America today that says, I'm going to go down there and I'm going to take the guy out of power. And if the people that are going to be in power after that, he said, right now we're going to run everything. The United States will until everything gets set up. But if the vice president doesn't control, then she's going to be in big trouble. Doesn't align, she's going to be in big trouble as well. And so what we're witnessing right now with Venezuela is not just another foreign policy dispute or a regional power struggle. It is a moment that has triggered a profound global debate about international law, national sovereignty, the future of multilateral governance itself. The U.S. intervention under President Trump has drawn sharp reactions across the world. They like that he took out Maduro, but they don't like that he's going against international law. So some of these world leaders, it's funny to hear them talk because they want to support it, but they don't. Because they're so pro-world government. And then, of course, allies and adversaries alike, they're asking the same fundamental questions. Who has the authority to intervene on another nation's affairs other than the great United Nations? Under what legal framework does such actions take place? And what happens to the international system when powerful states act unilaterally? Well, President Trump said, I don't care about all that. I'm going in. At the heart of the controversy it's really sovereignty. The principle that nations govern themselves without external coercion. Okay? But what if that state is trying to destroy your state? I mean, for decades, this idea has been a cornerstone of post-World War II international order, enshrined in the United Nations Charter. Critics of the intervention argue that bypassing multilateral institutions undermines that framework and sets a precedent that other global powers may follow. And so it's funny to watch these. It's kind of comical to watch some of these heads of state that say, "Oh, yeah, he should have went against. He should have taken out Maduro. He's a drug runner and all this other. He's got all these ties to Iran and China and Russia." And then they think, "Oh no, what I just say? He's going against international norms. Can't have that." And so they're having to juggle these things. Their response: international bodies and foreign governments have responded with warnings, not just about Venezuela, but about what comes next. If international law becomes optional for major powers, then smaller nations are left exposed, and global stability becomes increasingly fragile because they see the liberal international order as the only answer to all of the world's conflicts. And this is why so many leaders are calling for renewed commitment to diplomacy, international norms, multilateral decision-making, not because those systems are perfect, but because they say the alternative is unchecked power. Well, at the same time, supporters of the intervention, they argue that existing international institutions have failed to hold rogue regimes accountable, and that decisive action was necessary. And that tension between enforcement and legality is now at the center of the global conversation. Because there are people that are saying, what about the world government? That's what they're saying here. International law, world government. What about that? And they say, oh, there's no world government. No, don't think so. They say there's not one flag and there's not one system that's making all the decisions. When the Antichrist comes on the scene, that's exactly what it will be. The United Nations is what's pointing us in that direction. The United Nations is the seat of the world government, but it's a paper tiger right now. But on the backside of a World War III, that's going to be the entrance ramp for the Antichrist, and that's when it will become a fully functioning world governing body. I've talked about it for years now. My father-in-law talked about it for decades. My father-in-law, Irvin Baxter, did a video one time called World War III, Entrance Ramp for the Antichrist. He knew exactly what was coming. And this was years ago. And that's what's coming, folks. Right now, the first, you had World War I. The answer to the international community to that was world government, League of Nations. That failed. So 20 years later, we have World War II, a much bigger crisis, tens of millions of people killed. What was the answer to that? The same year the United Nations Charter was signed, 1945, the second effort for world government. That's the answer of the international community to a world war, world government. And so, but right now, the United Nations is a paper tiger. They can't do anything, especially with the United States going down and taking over Venezuela, and there's not one thing they can do about it. So what's coming? World War I wasn't a big enough crisis. World War II wasn't a big enough crisis. World War III is coming. The Bible says it is, and it's one of, if not the next event on God's prophetic timeline, the once-and-done event. Some events are ongoing all the way to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Some of them are once and done. World War III is going to happen, and then it's going to be over. The Chernobyl nuclear accident happened, and now it's over. Back in 1986, they're once and done. Some of them are ongoing for decades. The next once-and-done thing, in my opinion, is World War III. Could be a peace agreement. I don't know, but those are the next two. And what is important to understand about this debate, the debate today on the program, is that it's unfolding. It's not about creating a so-called world government. Rather, it is about whether the current international order can survive in a world where unilateral force increasingly replaces collective agreement, right? Venezuela has become a flashpoint, but the implications are global. It's just, again, Venezuela is a symptom of what really is going on globally. From Eastern Europe to the South China Sea, nations are watching really, really close. Can the United States get away with this? Right? They say President Trump is setting a precedent. How this moment is interpreted will influence future conflicts, alliances, and the credibility of international law itself. And the United Nations is saying, we can't let this one slide, guys. We got to do something. They've tried everything else to take President Trump down. The only thing they have left is a global war. What else do they have? What else do they have? This is not just a story about Venezuela today, everyone. It's a story about power, about accountability, and the rules that govern a rapidly changing world, and whether those rules still matter. And Iranian President Pezeshkian, he says Iran is in a state of total war with the United States, Israel, and Europe. What are they going to do about all this? And if we get by with going down in Venezuela, what's to stop, in the eyes of the international community, what's to stop the United States from going and taking over Iran? Now, what do you think Russia and China would do with that? You've got the leader of Iran now, not the mullahs, but the president, saying, his name's Pezeshkian, I think, that, hey, we're at total war with the United States, Israel, and Europe. And they're trying to get, I don't know if I'll have time to get to this today, but they're trying to get nuclear weapons again after what happened back in the 12-day war back in June. And they're building up because they have a religious ideology that they've got to destroy Israel. And, of course, the people of Iran, man, they are protesting and just going crazy because they're tired of living under such oppression. And look at the people in Venezuela. Man, they're down there just having one big party because they're sick of living under the thumb of a totalitarian despot. So what we're really watching right now, it's not a series of isolated crises. It's a convergence. On one front, Iran is accelerating its ballistic missile program at a frightening pace. Since it's, the brief but intense war with Israel, Tehran has clearly decided that if its nuclear program is more vulnerable, then its missile arsenal must grow even faster. And Iran's now boasting the largest missile stockpile in the Middle East, and with ranges that can reach U.S. bases and even Europe. And this is not idle talk, everybody. These weapons have already been used, fired at civilian targets, transferred to terror proxies like Hezbollah and the Houthis, and exported to Russia, where Iranian drones are devastating Ukraine. I read somewhere that that in Venezuela they were building Iranian drones. I mean, when we talk about an axis of evil, you can add Venezuela into that. And it's just these things, it's a convergence. It's conflicts around the world. They're united. They've kind of been shadowy. People have been saying, well, look at what happened in Venezuela the other day. Look at what happened in Russia. And they did this in Iran. And Iran did this with China. And back and forth. They're all in alliance with each other. And now you've had a President Trump that went in and said they bombed Iran in June. Now here we are in January. On January the 3rd, he goes down and he takes out Maduro. And the United Nations is sitting here looking at it saying, our world government is fracturing. We've got to have international law, and we've got to have, the International Court of Justice and the legality of everything. They're just arguing the legality of what President Trump is doing is wrong. Maduro has sovereignty. He does? He's not even the president, really. And so this is no longer a regional issue. Iran's missiles they're reshaping conflicts from Middle East to Europe, to Eastern Europe, a regime that openly calls for Israel's destruction, arms militias across multiple continents, props up Russia's war machine with their drones and things. They cannot be allowed to expand this capability without consequence. And the international community is sitting and looking at all of this. Sanctions, unified pressure, credible deterrence, including military options. Many people see them as they're not acts of aggression. These are acts of responsibility. The real danger is the hesitation. At the same time, 2025, in that year, look at last year, it marked something bigger than foreign policy alone. It marked a global realignment. Look at what's going on. Against every expectation of the political establishment, Donald Trump returned to the White House back in last year, and with that return came a direct confrontation with what many call the permanent governing class, the bureaucracies, intelligence agencies, and media structures that see themselves as rulers rather than servants. President Trump's second term, of course, he moved fast. He is sealing the borders, reversing inflation, dismantling green markets, confronting cartels, reasserting American leverage abroad. He put NATO on notice. Iran was put on notice. China, Russia, and the global elite all heard the same message. The era of managed decline is over. President Trump is standing against them all. Look at what happened this weekend. And it wasn't in 2020. The year 2025 really wasn't an ending. It was kind of a hinge. Think of it, a turning point where long suppressed forces surfaced, where global power structures began to crack, where unresolved threats like Iran's missiles, they could no longer be ignored. And so if you look at it, the real question is not whether history is changing. The question is whether the West will act or once again sit and watch until the cost becomes unbearable. Because the revolution, whether political, military, or prophetic, a lot of it's just beginning. History shows us that global wars they don't end violence. They redefine power. And while we're often taught that the international order born from war exists to protect freedom, the record tells a more troubling story. The larger the conflict, the more centralized and permanent the control that follows. That's what's coming in the near future with the Antichrist. I mean, think about this. Look after World War II. World War II did not defeat fascism or imperialism. It also gave birth to a web of global institutions, the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the international courts, all created in the name of peace, stability, and preventing future wars. But those are international organizations designed to govern the world. They came out of a world war scenario. And these institutions, they were not elected by the people they now influence. And over time, they've drifted far from their original purpose. Obviously, the United Nations, it was founded, now this was what it was sold to the American people. It was founded to prevent aggression between states. And yet today, their agencies routinely lecture sovereign nations on international policies. It's what they're doing to President Trump right now. International law says you can't do that. And he basically thumbed his nose at them and said, we're going to do it anyway. And this is why they're all up in arms. It's why it's so comical, because if you got to almost laugh to keep from crying, right? They're having to say, well, we're happy that he did this with Maduro, but he crossed the lines of international law and he can't do that. And just to watch them having to juggle their response, it's hilarious. Go watch some of the speeches. And these international organizations, I mean, from speech laws to energy use to educational standards, they're trying to govern everything. What began as coordination has now become oversight. Or consider international courts that now claim jurisdiction over national leaders, even when those leaders answer to their own voters and constitutions. The idea that unelected judges abroad could overrule domestic laws would have been unthinkable to America's founders, and yet it is now treated as progress. And this pattern accelerates every crisis. Think of it. After the attacks of September 11th, the 9/11, the United States passed the Patriot Act. Americans were told surveillance powers were temporary, necessary, and targeted. 2 decades later, those powers remain, expanded, normalized, and rarely questioned. Okay. What's the point I wanted to make in talking to you guys about all of this? The Bible says World War III is coming. And we have an axis of evil in the earth. It talks about Revelation 9, verse 13 through 21. loose the 4 angels bound in the great river Euphrates for to kill a third part of all of mankind. Iran seems to be the crossroads of all of this, right? It's kind of the intersection point. I know you've got Russia and China and Venezuela and probably many other nations. But Iran seems to be a crossroads for much of this. It's like Iran is Russia and China's footprint into the Middle East. A lot of different things happen, and Iran seems to be the crossroads. Well, Iran is one of the nations that is housed in, that the Euphrates River is housed in. It's one of the last 50 or 60-mile border between Iraq and Iran. The Bible says, loose the 4 angels bound in the great river Euphrates for to kill a third part of all of mankind. So you've got Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. So can I guarantee that Iran is going to be the spark that sets this thing off? No, I cannot. I don't know that at this point. I'm just telling you what the Bible says, and we can bank on what the Bible says. At this point, I have to speculate on some things. But I wanted to show you today how there's many factions that are at play here. There is with Venezuela, you have Russia, China, Iran, all involved, and probably many other players that are involved in Venezuela and drug running and influence on a lot of different things, footprints here in the Western Hemisphere, just below the southern portion of the United States here. And President Trump is coming at that, and what he's showing is that there's a real fracture in the world order that was established after the World War II in 1945. So there's a lot of things. The fracturing of the world order, this crime syndicate, that's probably a nice word for it. All kinds of horrific things are going on with this axis of evil. So you've got that at play. You've got President Trump coming at that. You've got President Trump coming against the world order. A lot of different things are at play here that are kind of unprecedented. And so certainly I wanted to bring it before y'all today because I'm watching it from a prophetic perspective. I can't explain every news story, but I know what's coming prophetically. And that's how we have to look at things. Because what are we doing here at End Time? We're preaching and teaching the gospel of the kingdom of God to the entire world, because the end time is now. We're preparing you guys for the soon return of Jesus Christ. But we've got to deal with all these things going on in the world, because the Bible talks about a world government and a world religious system and a mark of the beast and all these things that are coming, and a World War III. So God wanted us to know about all these things. Why? So we would prepare for his soon return. That's the goal in all of this. But hopefully we've made sense of what's going on with Venezuela and the axis of evil today. God bless.